Hey, did you know that over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but haven't subscribed yet? If you enjoy these true trucker horror stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It's free and really motivates us to keep the stories rolling. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's stories. The highway is quiet tonight. Too quiet. Welcome to the Sleep Haunt, where the road never ends and the stories only get darker. Tonight, we bring you 8 of the scariest trucker stories ever told. Real encounters from foggy rest stops, lonely motels, and endless stretches of asphalt where the night feels alive. Before we begin, we've set a goal. Let's reach 100 likes on this video. Tap that like button now and help keep our wheels turning through the dark. Story number 1. All night long, the truck moved like a clock hand through the prairie. Evan Holt kept a gentle pace across the 2-lane stretch between towns that slept too small to be named, where single bulbs over front porches glowed like stars trying their best. He had the cab pared down to what mattered: a thermos, a map folded a dozen times over, a second pair of gloves, and a small square of cloth that kept the windshield spotless. If the route was a song, he knew every note. Even the wiper blades seemed to remember the rhythm, ticking slow at the edge of a light mist that came and went like breath. The highway felt honest out there. No billboards, no gas stations on the horizon, just a patient seam stitched between fields and creek beds, and the dim suggestion of a silo every few miles. He'd driven it enough to sense when a curve approached by the way the land tilted under the dark. He trusted that instinct, and it had never embarrassed him before. Mile marker 256 slid past on the right. A green rectangle, reflector freckles, the number clean and level. He glanced at the time. His schedule was easy, no rush. He didn't plan to stop until Grierson Park Rest Area, a pull-off he liked because the vending machines there dispensed coffee that smelled better than it tasted, and because the map of the county was a faded blur of blue and tan that never pretended to know more than it did. 7 minutes later, he saw another green rectangle, 256. He didn't slow. Sometimes markers got replaced late or doubled by mistake. It happens. The engine's note stayed steady, a low, contented drone. He tightened the straps on his attention and watched for wildlife. A raccoon paused at the shoulder and changed its mind. The mist broke apart and gathered again, stroking the glass with transparent fingers. 9 minutes later, 256 again. He rolled his thumb across the worn steering wheel seam. He watched the white line. He glanced at the odometer and did the math without really doing it. The way numbers arrange themselves. When a mind is calm, the numbers didn't care. They told him he'd covered the right distance, a measurement of moving parts that felt certain. And yet the sign said 256, and the land around it looked arranged in the same quiet shapes it had before the fence drifted toward a slight slant. The ditch cupped a shallow pool with a skin-like slate, and beyond it, a dark knot of cottonwoods held together against the wind. A voice would have been welcome. He clicked on his CB, the old one he trusted because its static had a human personality. The dial turned with a soft resistance. The channels breathed. Nothing answered. Out here, that was normal. He shut it off and let the truck speak. Instead, the small rattles, the humming glass, the faint whir from the sleeper vent that always sounded like it might be whispering a word he used to know. He told himself the next marker would break the pattern. He kept to the center of the lane. The road went on like a thought that refuses to finish. Grierson Park Rest Area appeared at last, its blue sign standing straight under a mild halo. It said, 1 mile. Evan felt a small relief. Somewhere to stretch, somewhere to stand under a sodium lamp, breathe the quiet air, and feel the world say yes with ordinary things. He passed the entrance road once, then twice. He slowed to scan for the turn he already knew. A simple crescent driveway with a low stone wall and a glass-sided building that slept behind it. The rain ticked gently, not enough to matter. He took the exit, right signal calm, tread humming over the grooves that warned drivers to wake up. His rig climbed the slope and turned beneath the softened lights. The rest area looked exactly as it always did, which is to say it had a personality. The map under glass with a flown-away corner, no one ever bothered to fix. The picnic tables with their varnish peeling in long strips like curled paint. The vending machines that glowed in a friendly, lonely way. offering items that existed purely for their own satisfaction. Orange crackers, a sandwich in a triangle box, coffee brewed by a machine that refused to frown. He parked where he always parked, under the lamp that hummed and flickered once when moths asked the wrong question. The windshield wipers stopped at their proper bed. The engine's idle settled into a slow, restful heartbeat. He listened for other drivers. He heard none. Somewhere a flag made a soft sound like someone opening a folded map very carefully. A maintenance sign leaned against the wall by the restrooms. Wet floor. He didn't see any water. He stretched his legs and felt the night wrap him as if to say, "You're a part of this too." He walked toward the map. He had no reason to read it. He knew the roads. But the map had become a habit. The familiarity of it told him the world hadn't decided to try something different. While he wasn't looking, he stopped at the glass. The county looked the same. Pale blue veins for rivers. A wider gray for the interstate, compared to the thinner gray of this two-lane road. Grierson Park was a dot inside a small square that said area maintained by state. He smiled inwardly at the formality of it. He saw a date in the lower corner. It read 11/7. He remembered that date from before, and for no reason at all, that reassured him. Someone had put a tiny star sticker next to a line that went north. He'd noticed it once, months ago. It was still there. He wasn't sure who put it there, but it made the map personal. The vending machine buzzed like an insect deciding not to sleep. He bought coffee to keep the ritual intact. The cup came with a lid that didn't quite fit, and the heat rose in a small, hopeful cloud. He took a sip and laughed quietly at the taste, which still failed to meet its aroma halfway. That, too, felt right. On the way back to his rig, he noticed something out past the lot. Lights. Just a suggestion of them, moving along the highway. He stood still and watched his truck drive by on the main lane. It was just a shape, but he knew the shape, the way you know a familiar posture even when a person is a silhouette. The trailer had a reflective strip on the right rear corner that had faded to a deeper red, unlike the rest. This one had the same flaw. He watched it pass without sound. The reflection on its side caught the rest area sign and glanced a small flicker into the trees. He blinked and stood alone by his parked rig, which waited as it should, warm and resting. He listened. He heard only the lamp, the distant hush of the highway, the creak of a picnic bench settling the way old wood does. He told himself that the angle of the lot might play tricks on the eyes, the way south and east sometimes looked alike in the dark. He finished the coffee and placed the cup carefully in the bin, shaped like a polite metal cone. Back in the cab, he turned the key only enough to wake the panel lights. He watched the needles settle. The truck felt healthy. He breathed out and put it in gear, easing down the slope and merging again with the open, untidy night. Mile marker 256 stood ahead, waiting where the road flattened out, and then rose with a sigh. He passed it and counted to 10. He did not look in the mirrors. He did not adjust the dash lights. He kept breathing in the way he'd learned during winters when ice turned the world fragile, and he had to help it not crack. A voice pressed through the CB static then, thin as thread. He hadn't turned it on. The dial was dark. Still, the voice came, just a few words, turned sideways by static. He recognized them anyway, because they were his own. He had said them 15 minutes earlier in a different state of mind. Breaker 19? Anyone hearing me? The same rising note at the end, the same measured boredom that wasn't unkind. They moved through the air like a bird that got into the wrong room and wanted very badly to find the window. The voice repeated. It sounded tired of itself. It sounded like it wanted to be new but couldn't find a way. Evan checked the dial. It hadn't shifted. His thumb rested against it and felt the smoothness of years. He left it alone and let the voice fade. He drove like that for a time, with the sense that something had decided to keep him company by using his own echo. It wasn't threatening. It was simply unhelpful. Grierson Park rest area appeared again. The blue sign. The same measured light. 1 mile. He smiled because the world had a sense of humor tonight. He passed the exit once. He passed it twice. He turned in again because a joke is often less funny the second time, and because if the highway wished to repeat itself, He could at least make the repetition tidy. Everything in the lot was precisely as before. The wet floor sign, the vending machine with its soft indoor lighting, the map, the moths even, probably not the same moths but willing to keep the position. Only a single detail had shifted. The star on the map had moved a small fraction to the south, a thumb width at most. He stood there for a while, head tilted, letting the glass smudge his reflection into something that didn't look like a person until he moved. Someone in a yellow safety vest walked out from behind the building. The vest shone like a warning that had forgotten its words. The person raised a hand in a relaxed way and said nothing. Evan answered with a polite nod. The person motioned toward the highway with a friendly gesture that seemed to say, "No worries, keep rolling." A shape under the brim of the hat suggested eyes, but they didn't catch the light. The vest was too clean. That, and the shoes were spotless despite the mud by the drains. "Road work ahead?" he asked. The person tipped their hand, which might have been a yes, might have been just a reply for the sake of it. A soft sound came from the building. Maybe a dryer tumbling a load of towels and looking forward to finishing. The person turned and looked at the map without getting closer. The fluorescent light hummed. Somewhere a cricket decided not to start. Evan waited for a sentence and received only a comfortable silence, the kind people are proud of when they've known each other long enough. He nodded again, went back to the truck, and let the vest keep its unspoken story. He merged again, gentle throttle, blinkers announcing his intention to the empty world. The road accepted him, as always. He let the idea of the recirculating rest area sit beside him, the way a memory sits, present but polite. He kept his eyes away from the next mile marker. He used the sky as a guide instead, letting the edges of the clouds serve as rails. He spoke to himself without moving his lips. Stay steady. Count the seconds. Let the distance be distance. The sign slid past anyway, and the number 256 was stubborn and small. He thought about turning off all the lights and rolling quiet through the night until morning claimed him, but that wasn't his way. The truck liked the lights. The gauges liked to be read. It made them feel useful. He adjusted nothing, and adjusted everything, which is to say he rearranged what he paid attention to. He noticed the way the white paint curved around slight dips. He noticed two telephone poles that stood too close together, almost like leaning neighbors. He noticed tiny waves in the grass whenever the wind swam close to the ground. The world offered him its small inventory, and he accepted it. When the CB voice came again, it did not repeat his earlier words. It said something else in the exact same voice, but the sentence came out like it was learning to talk. "Don't look at the sign," it said in his tone, with his casual carefulness, as though advising himself on a route around construction. "Don't look at the sign." The dial remained dark. He placed a hand against the plastic casing and felt a small vibration that could have been anything, including his own belief in what he was hearing. He looked at the shoulder, at the monotone grass that looked like velvet under moonlight. He let the sign approach, a green glow in the corner of his eye. He let it pass, a kept promise he refused to measure. When the rest area returned a third time, he did not take the exit. He whispered thanks to it for being available and let it recede in his mirror, where it looked like a drawing erased by a soft touch. He pressed the accelerator just enough to feel the engine gather, then let it go again, keeping the speed lawful and constant. He thought about rules, not the posted ones, but the kind a person finds by accident and then respects. Don't honk at fog. Don't brake hard for shadows that behave politely. Don't say certain words aloud in a cab at 3 a.m. Don't think you are the only one driving the same mile. He added a new one quietly to the list. Don't read the marker that wants to be read. There was a bend somewhere on this section, modest as a bow. He knew it well. It never scared him in rain. It never surprised him in wind. He waited for that bend now like a friend arriving exactly on time. When it hadn't appeared after a span that felt longer than it should, he felt tension take an interest. He took a breath and released it slowly, as if letting fog out of a bottle. He reminded himself that the land had moods, that maybe the bend had already occurred in some unnoticed way, that the horizon did not owe him a plan. At the edge of hearing, tires whispered on somewhere else. He watched the other lane. Far ahead, a pair of marker lights moved in the same smooth way he did. The distance made it a toy. It grew. He watched for the color of a cab. He watched for the stripe on the trailer. When it swept by, the sound arrived a second later like a note played in another room. The truck was his truck. He saw his own coffee sticker on the driver's window, a small round thing with a kettle drum and a joke no one ever got on the first try. He didn't look at the driver. He didn't raise a hand. He kept his gaze soft and let the other version of himself disappear, trying not to wonder which of them was more real or why that mattered. His odometer began to do something he'd never seen. The numbers behaved, but the small trip counter, the one he reset at the start of each run, ticked up in tiny increments, and then gently breathed back down, as if it had been startled and then remembered its line in a play. He smiled without meaning to and thought, this is what happens when machines dream. The night softened further. The mist decided to be rain for a while, and the world accepted it. The wipers kept their rhythm, a metronome for thoughts that wanted to walk. He spoke to the road under his breath in a tone one might use with an old dog. You're all right. Keep going then. See, that's it. When the bend finally came, it arrived with a feeling of apology, as if the land had wandered off for a moment and hurried back. The turn felt easy, the kind you don't notice until you're past it. And beyond that bend, the sky ahead lost a degree of darkness, a change so small most people might call it nothing, but drivers live by small. Evan felt something unknit itself in his chest at the sight of that slight easing. It could have been the first suggestion of a far-off town. It could have been the highway finding a new color to try. Mile marker 257 appeared like a promise kept. He didn't cheer. He didn't let out air in a dramatic way. He said thank you without sound. The CB was quiet but friendly, the way radios are when no one is asking anything of them. He passed a crossroad that had a name and let it exist without memorizing it. The rest area did not reintroduce itself. At sunrise, which came without fuss, he took the exit into a truck stop whose lights had been awake all night and seemed proud of it. The lot held a few rigs, their windows silvered with morning. He parked between a refrigerated trailer that murmured in sleep and an old flatbed that looked like it remembered 100 storms. He turned the key and let the engine talk itself to silence. Inside, the coffee smelled like the promise from the vending machine finally kept. He poured a cup and watched a woman in a denim jacket write a note on a napkin with her finger, before actually writing it with a pen, as if practicing some phrase. The television in the corner talked about the weather with the affectionate concern only local people have. The world was normal in a way that greeted him like an acquaintance. He sat by the window. The glass reflected him gently, and the parking lot firmly. He set the cup in front of him and found, tucked into the door pocket of his jacket, a folded rest area brochure he did not remember taking. Grierson Park on the front in those calm letters. He unfolded it. Inside, where hours and rules and polite requests lived, someone had written a line in pencil that looked like his handwriting on a day when he'd been thinking too much. The words were simple. Don't look at the sign. He held the paper for a while. He folded it again and slipped it back where it had been. Outside, a maintenance worker in a yellow vest walked along the edge of the lot, bending now and then to check a drain. The vest caught the early light and gave it back. The worker glanced up, and in that glance there was nothing to worry about. Just a person doing a job that keeps things from becoming something else. Back on the road later, the trip counter behaved. Mile markers went up the way numbers do when they are agreed upon. The CB carried normal practical talk, alive with nicknames and directions. A century of sky opened over grain and grass, and Evan felt the satisfaction of a route rejoining itself. He would not tell anyone about the loop. There was nothing to tell that would be useful to someone else, except maybe the small rule he'd added in a night that had asked for a certain kind of patience. He kept that rule the way one keeps a new tool in a tidy place. And for the rest of the run, he treated the signs with respect, the way one treats a clock. Useful, but not to be argued with. Present, but not in charge. There are stretches of highway that memorize a driver as much as a driver memorizes them. Later, when he passed the county line and the radio picked up a song that had lived in his head once and moved out, he realized the feeling in his chest had not entirely left. It didn't need to. Some feelings keep a trucker company the way moonlight does quietly, leaving room for both of them to mind their own business. He took a long breath. The road offered one back. The day went on. A new marker rose and fell behind him. And if, later that night, in a different state with different grass and a new kind of mist, He found himself not quite compelled to read every green number, as if it were a friend calling his name. That felt all right. The highway is full of kindnesses too small to brag about, and some of them are measured by what a person chooses not to see. Story number 2. The first stretch after midnight always felt like glass, long, clean, and reflective. Luis Calderon eased his rig through the pines of the coastal plain, the road settling into a patient line that kept its promises. A soft rain earlier had turned to humidity, and his mirrors wore a faint halo from the moisture in the air. He set the cruise a tick under the limit, let the reefer hum behind him like a steady companion, and counted the breaths it took for the sky to lift and lower over the tree line. He was 3 states deep on a simple run. Packaged produce from the edge of the river country to a distribution center that never slept. He kept his cab tidy. The dash held a small family of important objects arranged just so. Logbook, a tin with mints that tasted like winter, a pen with blue ink because blue felt honest, and the transponder that usually took care of way stations before they took care of him. It wore its own small light, a square of promise that would blink green or yellow like a traffic signal meant only for one person. The interstate curved. The world on the shoulder slipped by in a series of polite vignettes, reflectors like cautious stars, road signs with tidy instructions, the occasional abandoned billboard frame that looked like a drawing of a house left unfinished. He knew these miles from a dozen prior routes, enough to anticipate where the pavement would whisper and where it would sing. He expected the first way station to be closed. It had been for weeks, according to the small news of truck stops. Renovations, someone said. New software. Fresh paint. Yet a mile out, the sign woke up in a serious green. Way station open. The arrow blinked as if practicing patience. The transponder on his windshield went thoughtful but quiet. He tapped the brake enough to make the trailer lean in slightly and pay attention. The left lane ran free. He made the signal long and polite and eased into the right, where the ramp shouldered off and slid him toward a low building with a roof like a flat hat and a series of lights as steady as a horizon. The station appeared like it always did, a rectangle of glass and concrete wearing the night without complaint. The lanes were marked in white, the scale pad a darker rectangle that glistened faintly, a red X over the far lane, a green arrow over his. He rolled, gentle, the tires stepping onto the scale like a person walking across a shallow stream on stones. The reefer's tone sat firm. The numbers on his dash did what numbers do, told the truth they were asked for. The intercom clicked on with a mild tone, the sound of a button pressed by someone who followed rules, because rules keep the night agreeable. Tractor, confirm 1 occupant. Luis leaned toward the mic and spoke with the voice he used for way stations. Clear, even, intent on not wasting anybody's time. 1 occupant. Cab weight indicates 2, said the intercom in a voice neither bored nor suspicious. Please secure vehicle and step inside for verification. He glanced at the transponder. Still no light. He considered the empty road beyond, a ribbon waiting for him. He considered the polite insistence of the intercom. He set the brake and stepped down, the steps of the cab making their acquainted clink. The air felt a degree cooler beside the building, as if the concrete kept a stash of night for later. Inside, the office had that peculiar tidiness that comes when people leave in a hurry but intend to return swiftly. A coat hung straight on a hook. A screensaver on a monitor made a soft shifting pattern like a fish changing its mind. A clock on the wall said 1:18 and sounded no intention of changing. On the counter, a paper cup waited beside a ring it had written on the surface, a small mark that proved time still existed. "Hello?" he called. The word walked a circle, deciding whether it had anywhere more important to be. A laser printer in the corner woke up like a dog turning to put its chin on its paws, and then thought better of it. A printer in the other corner, the older one that liked to make heat and smell like warm paper, stirred and offered a tongue of receipt tape. It stuttered through a line and spat out a small slip that curled neatly toward the edge of the counter. He picked it up. The header was as expected. State Transport, Station 05. Friendly crest in black ink. Below, in a font that pretended to be stern, it said, "Reway required." The next line stopped him. Over by 1 passenger. He laughed once in a way that tried to be light. He looked around for a person to share the oddity with. The empty office remained satisfied with its own company. The intercom woke again, patient and definite. Passenger must exit for re-way. He held the door, looked out at his rig. The passenger seat existed as passenger seats do clean. A couple of magazines tucked into the pocket. A water bottle in the cup holder. Belt lying in an easy line. He returned to the truck because movement felt like the right answer. Inside, the air held a faint cedar smell that hadn't been there earlier. He put his hand on the passenger belt, which rested casually, and it got heavier in his palm the way a rope does when someone picks up the other end. He didn't tug. He let it be and watched, leaving room for something, anything, to decide its own next step. The belt clicked softly, latching without his help. He stared at the buckle. It looked ordinary in the way all strange things begin. The intercom repeated itself with a calm certainty. Passenger must exit for re-way. He let his breath out the same way he let out a clutch slowly enough to keep all the parts friendly. "All right," he said to the empty space that might not be empty. He opened the passenger door. Humidity rolled in and then out like a tide, giving up early. No dramatic breeze, no sudden relief, just night air, kind and general. He waited. The dome light was the color of warm butter. He could hear the scale sensors ticking to themselves like insects. He could hear the reefer inspecting its own rhythm and approving it. The belt released by itself just a small, polite click, as if someone sensible had changed their mind about staying. Back on the pad, he crept forward as instructed, brakes whispering, trailer straight as a thought cut in cardboard. The weight settled into the numbers on the internal gauge in a way that felt like a sigh finding a chair. The intercom again, same tone, same certainty. Proceed. He wanted to ask 100 questions in a way that required answers from a person and not a set of wires. He wanted to record the moment with humor so he could tell it with a smile later. He wanted to not think about the belt. He set the brake, stepped down, and walked back to the office, because curiosity is its own fuel. The door opened on the same clock, the same unhurried screens. Behind the counter, a stack of forms waited like thin blank faces. A binder sat open under a paperweight shaped like a little boat. The pages were filled with neat notations about axle weights, compliance checks, signatures that liked sharp angles. He found his truck listed on a screen that tasted faintly of dust. The entry knew his plate number, his carrier, his load. The notes field contained 2 words in a line that blinked with a slow breath. Passenger exit. He slid the receipt into his pocket and stood for a second longer than necessary. The printer, as if having enjoyed their first collaboration, produced another slip without being asked. On it, the date matched the dashboard clock. The time stayed 1:18, as if the precise minute had expanded to hold them both. Result. Passed. Comment. None. He nodded at the space where a person would stand to take this receipt. He left half his coffee on the counter beside the ring left by another cup, a small human trade. Then he walked out into the patient dark and climbed back into his rolling room. The seatbelt lay in a comfortable curve. He looked at it without looking at it. He put the truck in gear and let the slow rising road welcome his tires. The scale's green arrow held steady, the red X on the far lane holding too, as if promising not to surprise anyone. Back on the interstate, the hum of speed set the world to its usual tempo. The transponder finally blinked green, a half-hearted late arrival to a conversation that had already ended. He switched the CB on to keep himself company with the low, friendly noise of people who speak in directions. The channels breathed. A fragment. Tires on gravel. Somebody laughing at a small joke. A weather update. Given by a voice that sounded genuinely interested in the wind. 5 miles later, the CB carried a tone he associated with way stations, the little chime they push when they mean business. He turned the volume down a notch, a courtesy. The chime repeated itself with perfect diction. Then, through a veil of static, a sentence arrived that came from nowhere reasonable. Passenger must exit for re-way. He adjusted the CB with 2 fingers, the way one adjusts a bow tie even if one never wears bow ties. Station 5. This is northbound. Already re-weighed. Copy, he said, because action has its own comfort. The CB breathed and returned a simple hush that somehow had texture. He drove on. The phrase returned. Polite, unchanged. Between trees, a low band of fog had decided to set up camp like a thin blanket laid across the ditch. The road lifted onto the long bridge that spanned a black sheen of water, the guardrail catching his lights and tossing them forward in modest rectangles. He watched the far end of the bridge the way one watches a finish line that is only a suggestion. Something knocked once inside the passenger door. Not an alarming sound, not a fist. More like someone adjusting their knee so it doesn't fall asleep. He talked to the cab the way he'd talk to a dog that wasn't his but liked him anyway. "You're fine," he said, "we're rolling." The transponder glowed green again without being asked. He covered it with his palm and felt a low warmth, as if it had a small idea of its own. He took his hand away. At a truck stop 3 towns on, he pulled in for fuel more out of choreography than need. The pump sat under a canopy that hummed in E-flat. He shut down the engine, listened to the reefer switch to its own quiet conversation, and stepped out. A light wind brought the smell of fried food and tires that have done a good job. He glanced at the passenger window out of habit. It had a soft fog print on the inside glass, a round shape that could have been the human habit of breathing. He stood with the nozzle in the tank and watched the numbers add themselves. A driver at the next island asked him, from inside a hoodie, how the road was. He said it was patient, which felt true. He didn't tell the story, because the story didn't feel finished, and because the other driver's face had that look that says, "I am also playing a game with the night I want to win." In the restroom, under a kind light that pretended to be daylight, he splashed water on his face and saw that his eyes looked older in a respectful way. On the way out, a bulletin board wore its usual mixture of business cards and helpful notes. Among them, a printed sheet caught his attention not because of what it said, but the way it was centered. The headline read, "Way Station, Renovation Schedule, Station 0, 5, closed through month's end." Beneath it, in a narrower font, a courtesy line. "If signs indicate open, proceed to next checkpoint." Signage may not reflect closure. He took a small breath that might have been laughter if he'd worked harder at it. A person behind the counter rang up a pack of gum for someone else and offered them a pen to sign a receipt with a flourish. The night had enough ordinary details to support whatever strange detail had slid into it. Back in the cab, he checked the passenger belt. The buckle had found its peaceful place again. He started the engine and watched it go through its polite sequence of self-esteem. The CB said nothing odd. He pulled onto the access road and let a local pickup pass, because kindness to locals keeps the road generous later. He thought about rules, the unofficial kind. Tires don't lie. Fog is less trouble if treated like a guest. An exit you haven't used in a while will try to look like another exit, just to make you pay attention. He added a new one, without malice. If a way station thinks you have company, listen. On the next long grade, the sky did that trick it does before dawn, where it takes a half step back and lets you see the edges of things without actually helping. He turned down the dash lights until the needles looked like fireflies. The reefer's breath held steady. The road kept moving under him with that confidence old asphalt has earned. From the northbound shoulder came a glow, the kind that marks an old bus stop or a forgotten park and ride. Not much to it, just a little square of level ground, with a lamp that had decided to work longer than anyone expected. He signaled and guided the rig into the pullout, tires biting gravel with a soft letter sound. He stopped there a moment, no one else in sight. The lamp hummed. Moths wrote their poems up near the light and forgot them immediately, which is the moth way. The passenger window clouded a little more, and then cleared, as if someone had leaned closer to look, and then leaned away, satisfied. "All right," he said toward the seat, which was not a strange thing to do if you had been told you were not alone. "This is your stop if you need one." He pressed the passenger door lock open with his thumb and left it open. The dome light came on of its own accord, a rest stop sun that made the world slow and kind. He waited. He breathed with the reefer. He listened for something dramatic and received only the best kind of answer. Nothing obvious, nothing rude. The belt's metal tongue turned a fraction, a small admission that it existed, then grew still. The air felt less cedar, more plain. The dome light eased itself back, took one last look at the cab, and clicked off. It felt like a nod. Back on the interstate, his pace felt different, not faster or slower, but situated, the word a park ranger might use. The transponder settled into the indifference of machines that are not needed right now. The radio offered a weather band that whispered about river fog, then gave way to a country song that took its time. At dawn, he squared into the delivery loop like a pen sliding into a sleeve. The dock supervisor wore a beanie and a careful smile. Paperwork changed hands the way it always does, with the small ceremony of signatures and times. He tore the carbons with respect, placed them in order, and noticed a thin strip of receipt paper tucked among them that he had not put there. He slid it free. It was from Station 05 like the other, but this one was older. The paper itself had yellowed a shade. At the bottom, in a field where notes are sometimes scribbled, someone had written with a hard pencil, "Passenger exit complete." The date was last year. The time was 1:18. He pocketed the slip without drawing attention to his face. The dock rattled. A forklift coughed, and then cleared its throat. Morning took the sky and put color back into it in pieces. He finished his route as the day unrolled its responsible light. He did not try to explain anything. He let the strange detail take up a small square of room in his mind, the way one lets a keepsake live in a drawer without needing to put it on a shelf. A week later, he passed Station 05 again while the sun was awake. The open sign was dark. Construction tape pulled a careful line between cones. A crew worked quietly, their vests bright under the day. He did not stop, but he glanced at the office door as he went by and saw a ring on the counter in the shadow of the window, the kind a cup leaves when it rests where it shouldn't and is forgiven. Out on the straightaway, the road found its usual tone. The truck breathed through the gears like a considerate athlete. Pines made a crowd on both sides and decided not to speak. He reached for the mints and found, beneath the tin, the small slip the older printer had given him. Result. Passed. Comment. Known. He folded it once, then again, and slid it into the sleeve of his logbook where quiet things wait. Night has a way of remembering who listens. The next time a way station spoke, he listened. Sometimes the arrow will say green. Sometimes the transponder will blink yellow and sing a brief note. And sometimes a voice will ask for something that sounds like trouble but isn't. When it did, he let the truck answer with the simple act of pausing, of giving the dark a place to be. He drove away afterward and found the highway exactly where he left it, which is the only proof anyone really needs. Story number 3. Marla Reyes liked the kind of night that felt balanced. High desert, light wind, a lane that kept its line like it had studied how to behave. She rolled east along a forgotten stretch where the interstate bowed around a plateau and then returned to itself. The sky was wide and quiet, a field set out with cold stars. Her trailer held palletized paint, strapped down neat, weight spread evenly so the axles did not sigh at her. The cab was tidy white marks on the dash, a lemon-scented cloth folded where the cup holder didn't quite fit the cup, window glass polished until the oncoming reflectors turned into small, well-timed winks. She had a radio song playing softly, a tune that knew how to give a road its space. Behind that, the engine kept a calm hum, neither bored nor eager. She'd eaten early, drank water instead of the coffee that made her hands chatter, and felt good enough to keep going until the next truck plaza, that had the hand-lettered sign for fresh tortillas and eggs, until dawn. 2 more hours, maybe 3. The desert made time easier. A mile beyond a low ridge, a sign appeared in the arc of her lights that did not belong. Orange ahead, a diamond on a metal stand. The kind that gets set by crews who speak in hand signals and nods. The legend read, "Road work next, 12 miles." She eased off the cruise a notch. No problem. Cones meant people. People meant care. She scanned the shoulder for equipment. Nothing, just sage and basalt, and the occasional tumble of fence wire curled like the forgotten thought. The reflective tape on the sign caught her beams and held them the way clean glass does. She considered that she hadn't heard anything about a project in this section. Construction notices tended to float through truck stops like weather predictions that were a little proud of themselves. Someone would have said something, but roads change their minds sometimes without announcing it, and nothing about road work had ever tried to harm anyone. A second sign blinked awake where the median widened. Reduce speed ahead. She was already there, down to 55, then 50. Seat forward a notch to sit a touch taller. Cones began. A measured line edged along the right shoulder, crisp as if set by a crew that really liked getting it right. They continued like beads into the dark, each with a ring of reflective tape that lifted into her headlights, and then passed off their light to the next. She checked the CB out of habit. Channel 19 offered only the breath of distant chatter. She tried the weather band and let it murmur about a dry front and a breeze that wouldn't commit to anything. On the right, a portable message board waited on the gravel with its face black. As she drew even, the screen woke without flicker. Use right lane. Under it, letters scrolled with a level gentleness. No hurry. Thank you for slowing. She smiled reflexively. Someone had programmed manners into the board. Then, as she cleared it, the bottom line stuttered and reformed. Marla, right lane. The name put a pause in her chest. It wasn't rare to see a board address drivers by lane or vehicle type. Names no. She checked the mirrors. No troopers, no work trucks, no pilot cars. No one at all but her, the cones, and the board that had used a tone most people reserve for neighbors. She could explain it to herself if she needed to. Maybe the board cycled through a preloaded list. Maybe the first line of a phone update had filled a field with stray data. Maybe the reflection had tricked her. She took right lane as instructed and let her foot stay gentle on the pedal. Another board ahead hummed faintly, that small electric sound LED panels share. It had 2 lines of slow-moving words. Expect stop. Then, as she neared, "You're doing great," she laughed, which made her jaw unclench. "Okay," she said to the empty cab, in a tone that kept the situation modest. "Me too." Cones shifted wider, as if to guide. The left lane slipped behind more barrels until it ceased. Right lane bent a degree around a low knuckle of rock. She recognized the place, an old alignment that peeled away for a service road down to Bowers Wash where water could chew a surprise in spring. The new interstate rose on a berm and crossed everything clean. Nothing about this zone made sense. And yet the choreography was flawless. Signage told the truth. Distances between cones were exact. Whatever this was, it had studied the manual. She reached a speed limit sign that did not match the interstate's normal muscle, 35 work zone. She obeyed without argument. The engine's note softened. Tires leaned into the aggregate. Her headlights found a line of barrels that led to a pickup idling on the shoulder, facing forward with an arrow board mounted on its tailgate. The board blinked a calm left arrow, then a right, then settled on double chevrons that suggested, "Follow me." The pickup's hazard lights ticked their metronome, the sound finding its way into her cab somehow. A faint click exactly in time with her heart for a few beats, and then slightly off as if to avoid becoming too clever. The pickup began to move. The 2 words lit up on its rear glass in orange blocks. "Follow me." She touched the CB. "Pilot car, you got me?" she asked. A small professional courtesy. Silence answered gently. The pickup's brake lights brightened, then eased. Tires crunching fine gravel, it led her onto the side access. Marla kept the rig's wheel steady, trusting her mirrors, giving the trailer room where the shoulder narrowed. The desert shifted closer. Sage brushed past at knee height on 1,000 stems. The main line of the interstate rose slightly to her left, dark and aloof now, as if watching her take a detour chosen by someone who knew this ground. The sensation tugged at a memory not fully developed. Years ago in high school, she'd volunteered on a county safety drill and been assigned to hold a slow, divided by stop paddle on a sleepy avenue. The vests, the hand signals, the pride in keeping strangers calm, it had felt like taking care of something people rarely notice. This had that feeling, only she was the stranger, and someone else was holding the paddle for her. They descended gently into a low draw. The air cooled a degree. Crickets tried a chorus and changed their mind, leaving a faint tremolo behind the hum of tires. The old bridge came into view, not the interstate span of concrete high and easy, but a narrow wooden temporary structure with steel railings that had seen storms and kept their manners. She could smell a resin note in the cool, a hint of freshly sawn timber. The pickup paused at the near end. A portable floodlight tower bathed the approaches in a quietly bright wash. The light made her mirrors glow like stones under shallow water. On the right, a sign on a tripod read "Stop here for escort." Beneath, someone had tape-labeled her carrier's name in block letters that looked like they'd been written by a careful hand. Below that, smaller, Marla Rees. Her scalp prickled. She set the brake, both because the sign asked and because it felt good to make a small, definite choice. The pickup idled ahead. No one stepped out. The floodlight hummed softly, the music of a generator tuned low. To her left, at the edge of the light, a portable table stood with a clipboard and pen. No chair, no water cooler. Just a square of order, waiting in the dark like a task at the exact right moment. Marla opened her door and climbed down, boots meeting compacted gravel with a sound that felt placed on purpose. The air had that night-clean smell the desert saves for those who pay attention. She walked to the table. On the page in the glow, a simple heading, Night Escort Log. Under it, lines of dates and times written in tidy script. Some names she recognized in the way drivers recognize each other. Dispatch call signs and real names, the familiar mix. Her name sat on the next open line, already printed, with a blank for signature and time. The minute column read 2:06. Her dash clock said 2:06, as if the page had taken its time from her and not the other way. She picked up the pen. It had a weight like a good wrench. The ink flowed without effort. She signed and felt a small ease in her chest, as if a door had clicked in a frame. And now the room and the hall agreed about where they ended. The generator coughed once and settled. The floodlight blinked and then sharpened, like a person adjusting their glasses. The pickup's message updated, cross slow. Marla climbed back into the cab, feeling surprisingly at home. She brought the rig onto the planked surface with the slow, deliberate patience required by bridges that have a memory. The tires drummed across each board seam in a heartbeat pattern that matched neither her pulse nor any song she knew. The river beneath just breathed, invisible but present, a cool note that slid under the door and into the cab, the kind of night air that carried no scent but itself. Halfway across, the pickup paused again. On its tailgate board, new letters formed in a measured way that made the words feel personal. Keep right. Thank you. As she obeyed, the mirror showed movement on the old bank. Not people shapes in reflective strips that suggested vests but didn't commit to bodies. The strips turned this way and that, as if checking lines. No sound of footsteps, no coughs, no clank of tools. Just the suggestion of attention. The pickup signaled again and continued. On the far side, the access road lifted out of the wash and traced the base of an unlit cut. Cones grew sparse. The desert returned its own rhythm. The night carried a far-off punctuation, a single beep like the warning tone of a machine reversing somewhere. It would not be smart to step. Then nothing. The pickup's follow-me letters held their color, steady as a campfire ember. Marla watched the license plate because it was there to be watched, and noticed that time had been kind to it. The numbers were ordinary. The county tag was for a county that didn't lie near here. She recognized it from another life 3 states away. Her eyes made connections her mind told them to ignore, the way a face in a crowd looks like someone you once knew until you get closer. They climbed gently to where the access met the eastbound lane again. A short run of barricades funneled them toward an opening that accepted the width of a semi, and no more. The pickup stopped one last time. The message board softened its glow and formed 2 final sentences that appeared one after the other, so the eye could treat each with care. Merge ahead. Drive well, Marla. She raised a hand, a reflex she laughed at the same instant she did it. The pickup's hazards gave 2 slow blinks, then darkened. When she cleared the barrels and brought her rig onto the interstate, the road under her tires felt like a benevolent machine that had agreed to be exactly what it said it was. In the mirror, beyond the final row of cones, the floodlight dimmed and clicked, off. The desert took back that square of brightness, with the politeness of someone returning something borrowed. She accelerated to 45, then 50. The engine found its comfortable key. The main line opened long and simple. No further signs. No boards with helpful moods. The sky remained the same honest black it had been. Stars crouched low over the ridge like animals at rest. Her phone buzzed once with a silent notification, the way apps send courtesy notes. She glanced at it where it lived in the mount. A message banner from the state DOT road alerts. Thanks for your patience during overnight escort operation. She hadn't signed up for alerts in this region. She touched nothing. The banner faded and did not return. At La Silla Travel Center, near mile 388, where the asphalt smell always seemed stronger, she pulled off for fuel and a walk around. The canopy lights hummed in their own league. A couple of other drivers lifted hands without needing to make talk. Inside, a corkboard near the coffee urns held a fresh flyer, likely dropped off by a contractor. Night work over Bowers Wash. A map with a dotted line. In the margin, someone had written in pencil, "Temporary access via old grade, escorts provided." The date was last week. The flyer based its certainty on a schedule that had already ended. At the counter, the clerk with the baseball cap asked how the desert was. Marla said it had been cooperative and asked, like a person who didn't much care about the answer but cared about the asking, "They still fixing that washout?" The clerk raised eyebrows. "Washout? They straightened that avenue when my father was young. Interstate never blinks there." "Why?" Marla gestured vaguely toward the south, as if arm geometry could provide a footnote. "Saw cones," she said. "Temporary run. Pilot. County does drills sometimes," the clerk offered, like a person making peace between two versions of the same story. "They practice in the empty." "That what you saw?" "Could be," Marla said, which was true in all the ways that mattered, and none of the ways that didn't. She bought a bottle of water and a pack of gum, because that felt like a good way to keep the world modest. In the cab, she opened her logbook to make a note. A paper that wasn't hers slid out from under the cover, a thin slip with the DOT crest, the kind used when someone has a stack of them on a clipboard near a lamp and a table with gravel dust on its legs. "Escort completed," it read. Time: 2:12. Signature: M. Rays. The ink looked like hers, and not like hers. She touched it with a fingertip, as if it might have its own temperature. It had none that a finger could tell. Sunrise waited a long time before deciding. When it came as a suggestion of bronze along the far ridge. Then a widening band of clarity that made the desert a little less secret. She merged back onto the interstate. The lanes behaved. The mileposts moved like small, consistent thoughts. The wind tested the trailer lazily and found it obedient. Daylight revealed no scuff marks where cones had been, no prints in the gravel where the table had stood, no tire tracks from the pickup. That felt correct somehow. Work zones are meant to leave no trace. The best ones use the night and give the day back improved. At the next miles-long straight, she set the cruise and let herself measure nothing for a while. The radio found a new station. A farm report carried the kind of kindness a voice learns from getting up early for many years in a row. The road rose and fell so gently you could call it flat and not be wrong. When reception returned in a stronger way, her phone gathered a batch of messages it had missed. Among them, one from her dispatch. "Appreciate your quick pass through the detour. DOT sent a note saying, you signed through. Looked smooth on our end. Call if you had issues." She stared at it, then at the windshield, where a bug made a tidy star, a little below her line of sight. She wiped the glass with the cloth folded exactly for that job. The star disappeared. The road stayed the same. The rest of the run went on without asking much of her beyond the normal kindness and concentration. She delivered on time. The dock doors looked like teeth in a grin. A forklift zipped, cautious and precise. Paperwork came out of a printer at just the speed it wanted to. She slept, woke, turned, rolled home, living the rhythm she'd built for herself, one good decision at a time. 2 weeks later, heading west under a sky so clear it felt new, she took the long route on purpose to see the ridge in daylight. Bowers Wash looked exactly like a shallow blue thread from above. The interstate crossed it in a span of pale concrete that didn't even know it had a name. She looked for the access road and found a line in the land that could be anything: a deer path, a memory of a survey stake, the kind of scar that only shows itself to people who want to believe land remembers. At the shoulder where the table must have stood, a small patch of dirt had been tamped flat very recently. On it lay a little plastic tag no bigger than a gum wrapper. It had blown up against a tuft of grass and stopped. She pulled over only long enough to walk and read it. Reflective backing, peel-off strip, still half attached. Printed on it in plain black. Work zone, thank you, please drive well. She put the tag in the door pocket with the map she didn't trust and the pen that always worked on the second try. Back in the cab, she sat a moment longer than the engine needed. The wind lifted once, then settled. A hawk hung over the wash as if listening to the ground. The road said nothing and everything. That night, 300 miles later near a canyon where signals like to drop and show up again with enthusiasm, she passed a portable message board tucked away on the dirt near a maintenance pullout. Its face was dark. As she passed, it brightened just enough to throw a brief square of light on the brush and arranged 2 short words, as if they had been waiting. Drive well. Then it went to sleep. Marla's hands felt easy on the wheel. She checked her mirrors, saw the trailer where it should be, looked ahead at a stripe that meant what it said. She had not been scared that night. She had been included. Some parts of the job were like that. If the road wanted to teach a lesson, it used courtesy, not drama. She didn't tell the tale at the counter where stories gather and grow until they tip. Some things are better when they stay exactly the size they happened. She kept the slip with her signature in the logbook, with the other slips that proved nothing and everything. And when a sign later that month asked for a slower pace near a crew cleaning the median, she gave them more than they asked, because somewhere in the dark a floodlight had hummed, just for her, and a patient set of letters had been kind. Story number 4. Asha Patel liked the quiet middle hours when the farm country flattened out and the sky seemed to do less talking. She guided her rig along a 2-lane state route that threaded between silos, empty grain elevators, and long sections of fence where the wind checked on each post like a neighbor, making sure the lights were off. Her trailer held palletized seed, sealed tight. The weight squared nicely over the axles so the truck rode low and steady. Inside the cab, a worn atlas tucked in the pocket by the door, a thermos that kept its promise, a dash wiped clean until the gauges shone like good manners, and a tiny brass charm tied with a red thread that bobbed gently when the road put a ripple in the air. Mid-autumn had laid a neat chill on the fields. Any fog that could have formed chose not to. Stars held their places in a sensible way, and the moon, not quite full, slid along the shoulder like a soft pace car. She kept a pace that made dispatch happy, and her hands calm. The radio stayed low. A call-in show about crop yields rolled into a late song from a station that knew to keep vocals friendly and guitars gentle after midnight. She'd driven this stretch plenty. It was one of those roads with a few official names and a handful more attached to it by people who'd grown up nearby. On her paper map, it was simply a thin line that cut straight through county squares. Years ago, there had been a rail spur here, a short line that wandered off toward a now quiet mill by the river. Most of the track was gone. The crossing had been paved smooth, the way you erase a sentence and forget where the period ought to be. The first part of the oddness was easy to ignore. An advance warning sign leaned out of the dark round, yellow, the big X and simple R's that mean railroad ahead. She hadn't seen that in a good while on this road. She told herself it was a leftover the county never pulled. Still, the rumble strips came next. 3 shallow speed alerts across the lane that politely tapped her tires and asked her to be mindful. Her trailer answered with the small, hollow boom it made when the road gave it advice. She eased down to 45. No hurry. If the county wanted her cautious at a place where trains no longer ran, she could be cautious. A reflective crossbuck rose in her beams, bright white, the X sharp, the words, "Railroad crossing" clean as if painted yesterday. Beyond it, 2 mast lights with round red eyes blinked to life with a steady, measured pulse. The bell chimed, metal on metal. That particular bright ringing every driver knows, without thinking. She touched the brake, smooth and sure. The gate arm on her side lowered, striped red and white, finished with the small square of glass reflectors that always made her think of checkerboards. The arm settled in front of her lane, as if it had done this all week. She scanned left, then right, the way a person does when a rule has been invoked. The fields reached out flat to the tree line. The line of the old rail bed was a slightly raised scar in the dirt, clean of any steel. No headlight grew in the distance. No whistle touched her ear. The bell kept its patient song. The red eyes kept their blink. Maybe there was maintenance. Maybe a test. Maybe a false trigger. She set the parking brake and left the truck in gear, so nothing would feel free to move unless she gave it permission. The night had time for this, and so did she. She flipped on her hazards to offer a bit of extra light to no one at all. Wind moved over the fields with that low hush that sounds like speech in another room. Out across the flat, one patch of grass bent ahead of the rest. A rippling past, a line in the crop as clean as a zipper pulling. She knew the shape of a gust, how it travels and breaks. This didn't break. It held together like something long and full, and moving through air with a destination. On her left, near the cottonwoods, a dark mass eased between the trunks and the open. No lights, no color. Just a deeper rectangle sliding across the black. Then another, and another. Each one found its place at the pace a long freight takes when the night is on its side, and the weight is its own language. The sound wasn't a clatter, it was a pressure, a hush given weight. The bell in front of her kept time with it, as if matching an old partner's steps. The red lenses stuttered, but their rhythm remained true. She checked her mirrors. The road behind was shy of traffic. The cab felt very quiet, in the way it does, when there is nothing to fix and nothing to defend. She placed her palm against the steering wheel, not holding, just saying she was here. Asha leaned toward the passenger window and peered down the line. In the glow from the signal mast, she thought she saw a glint like metal, catching a thought of light right where the unslept rail would be. Then the glint vanished, and the field was only field again. The gate arm trembled once in its hinge and held. She reached for her phone to check the placard on the signal box, the one with the crossing number and a call center listed. The little plate had numbers neatly stamped in black. She dialed. The ring came from far away and took its time. A recorded voice answered, no nonsense and yet almost apologetic. You have reached the crossing information line. The crossing identifier you have entered is retired. If there is an emergency, hang up and dial 911. The options tree did not include, the pass just beeped at me. She hung up, then flipped the CB to a common channel. Anyone else running east of County 14 seeing a live crossing at Oak Spur? She asked in the tone drivers use when they hope for simple answers. Static gave way to a voice a county or two ahead. Oak Spur hasn't had steel in a decade, the voice said, not unkindly. But I've seen those Reds act up. If she's singing, let her sing. Another voice, warmer, added, let it pass, sister. It's a long one tonight. She thanked them and settled back. The not-quite train moved with a convincing steadiness. She tried to match what she sensed to the old habit of watching a freight go by when her father had taken her to the depot as a kid. Back then, the wheels had made a swift rhythm under the cars, and the air had tasted like hot iron and dust. Here, the scent that rode in the window was a faint, clean hint of creosote, shifted by cold. She had no idea where the smell had come from. It felt like a memory that remembered itself, not something present in the world. The bell fell silent. The red eyes paused in their shared blink, both dark for a breath. Then they resumed. The pressure in the fields eased, trailing out toward the trees, as if whatever had been in motion had broken into nothing but air again. She waited. The arm did not lift. The motor that should have raised it said nothing. She tapped the brake pedal once. A gentle suggestion. Nothing. Her watch said 3 minutes had passed. Her instinct had the number at 10. Time expands in small boxes. She got out, careful with her footing on the fine gravel, and felt that clean, chill bite at her face. The night was a plane of sound. Insects trying a small line of chorus, then stopping. The motor of her reefer keeping its own heartbeat. The distant shift of something feathered in a tree. She walked to the post. The arm looked like every arm she'd ever seen. Up close, the paint had tiny scratches from storms, and Sunday, the counterweight sat in its hood, obedient and patient. The lock that kept the housing shut wore the same dull gray as it had in daylight the last time she'd passed here. Nothing in the world around it said theater. Everything said only itself. From behind her, far down the road, a pair of lights appeared in the westbound lane, then eased to a modest approach. The engine note behind those lights sounded old, but healthy. A pickup the color of dust stopped opposite her truck, idled, and then shut down. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Tall, wearing a cap, with the county's name stitched above the brim. He lifted a hand. "Everything okay?" he asked in a voice that had lived outdoors. "Gates down," she answered. "It thinks a train came through." He stepped to the edge of the light and peered down the long flat where the tracks had once been. He listened, the way some people listen with their whole posture. Then he smiled, not amused. Exactly. More like resigned and fond at once. "This one gets nostalgic," he said. "Happens maybe twice a year." She raised an eyebrow. "Nostalgic," she repeated, trying the word on the night. "Old equipment," he said. "Wind can whisper to the circuit. Might be a test that didn't get told not to run, or maybe the county forgot to pull one more wire when they paved. We come out and tie it up in the morning when we get the call. He didn't move to do that now. He only looked at the impeccable downed arm, as if they were both waiting for the same cue. Any chance it'll lift on its own? She asked. He nodded once. Always has. They stood in companionable quiet. The fields were so polite, you could hear the idea of frost forming. The man glanced at her truck, at the company name on her doors. You keep a good rig, he said, absent as a comment on weather. Try to, she said. The red lenses blinked one last slow pair, then went still. The bell, as if waking from a short nap, gave a single sleepy tap and then found no reason to continue. The arm rose with the soft mechanical confidence of a thing sure of its job. It paused at halfway, considered some small internal math, then continued to vertical. The crossbuck nodded the way wood nods in a breeze. The county man tipped his head, as if someone had answered a question he'd forgotten he'd asked. There you go, he said. Safe travels. Night, she said. He returned to his pickup, started it without fuss, and pulled away without his lights on for a second, as if he disliked throwing light at the fields. Then he remembered himself and turned them on, and the ordinary cone of beams licked the ditch and moved on. Back in the cab, Asha felt the warmth settle around her again. The truck had kept her seat for her like a friend. She rolled forward, over the place where rails weren't. As her steer tires crossed, a small click passed up into her boots, the kind of sound tires make on a seam where the paving changes. She didn't look away from the lane. She folded the success of the moment into the habit of motion and took the truck back to a speed that admitted she had a schedule. At the next town, a convenience store glowed with the sort of neutral light that makes everyone look honest. She pulled in for fuel and a stretch. The pump canopy hummed in a way that would have found a piano note if anyone had cared to listen. Inside, near the coffee, a bulletin board held a flyer about a fall festival, a notice for someone's lost dog, and a faded safety notice with a map of the county's at-grade crossings. A red X marked Oak Spur. Below it in small letters, retired. The ink had ghosted onto the paper behind it, where someone had pressed too hard long ago. Y'all get stopped by the ghost down there? The clerk asked, like someone checking on rain. Something like that, Asha said. Gate gets bored sometimes, the clerk said. We don't mind. Keeps people careful. County swears it's dead. Bell thinks otherwise. She handed Asha a stir stick she hadn't asked for. Night likes its routines. When Asha stepped back into the dark, the sky had rolled a little. The moon had eased to a new angle. On the nose of her hood, dust had traced a pattern as fine as chalk lines, a set of long, thin stripes that started nowhere and ended at the edge like someone had brushed past with a bundle of reeds. She wiped them with the back of her glove and felt the dry powder come away. The mark wasn't stubborn. It just wanted to be noticed. She made the rest of the run with a light hand. The road allowed it. The fields now and then offered a line of fog low to the ground, like sleeping animals. A barn light in the distance decided it had done enough and went out at exactly the moment she glanced at it, which felt both planned and accidental. Her phone flashed a low signal and then forgot to care. She let the cab's quiet keep the night company. Near dawn, she checked the dash cam out of curiosity while parked at a pullout with a view of a water tower that always made her think of someone patient holding up a bowl. The footage showed the gate lowering, the red lights blinking, the bell swinging a little in its cage. The field beyond the crossing was simply black on black. The camera didn't know how to see air being written on. When the arm lifted, the video made a soft leap of brightness and then resumed as if nothing particular had passed between frames. She saved the clip without naming it anything dramatic. Morning spread itself over the county line. The world began to remember color straw yellow, faded denim sky, a coin edge of light along the silos. She rolled through a town that smelled faintly of baking from a place that served breakfast to people who got up before they needed to. The road made a left and then a right, the way a ribbon decides where the knot should sit. She arrived at her drop a hair early, signed the paperwork, and let the forklift's careful ballet do its work. Later that week, she went through the same stretch in daylight. The old crossing offered itself up exactly as announced. Crossbuck on a new pole, the lenses bagged with dark cloth, the gate arm locked at a respectful tilt that wasn't quite vertical. The housing door bore a flat space where a placard had once been. Weeds did their community work in the ditch. making everyone look like part of something that keeps growing. She pulled onto the wide shoulder a moment and looked at the field. The long line of the rail bed was visible if you knew how to let your eyes soften. A hawk rode a flat wind with the self-assurance of a teacher. A tractor far off practiced straight lines older than the road. Nothing moved that didn't have a reason. That was comforting. A month later, near a river road 2 counties away, she caught the faint swing of red in the corner of her eye where no rails had ever been. Her hands did what they should. She eased, looked, listened. The red blinked once and then decided not to. She drove on and thought about all the signals a night can give, and how the useful ones rarely raise their voices. From then on, if someone at a counter asked about odd things on the road, she had something to offer that took its time to be told and did not ask for belief. She didn't bother with conclusions. She didn't claim a ghost. She just said the crossing got nostalgic, and the bell remembered its job, and that something large had passed where nothing should. People nodded because nights have a way of making room for more than one truth. Every once in a while, at exactly the point in a long stretch where the mind looks for a landmark, she would hear in memory the bright metal ring of that bell. It came without worry. It came like a practice run for a thought. She kept her speed. She checked her mirrors. She let the road be a road. And when a real, living train later that winter rolled along a far parallel track with its horns giving the long, long, short, long, she smiled at the rightness of it and gave it a little nod, as if greeting an old neighbor who'd come back to town and decided to behave. Story number 5. The grade up to the pass had a way of thinning out the world until only what mattered stayed. Tariq Hassan liked that. He kept his rig in a long, patient pull, gears set to a steady climb, coolant exactly where it should be. The night held cool mountain air with a cedar undertone, the kind that made a driver's shoulders drop an inch. His trailer carried paper stock quiet, square, strapped neat. Inside the cab, the practical little kingdom. Thermos, logbook, a soft cloth folded twice, a coin stuck by habit in the rubber tray, and a stubby pencil with a chewed eraser that always wrote better than it looked. The dash lights were turned down to a dim constellation. The road worked its way between dark slopes like a black ribbon laid on slate. Pines rose tight to the shoulders. Here and there, the hillside angled back to make brief shelves where snow would collect later in the year. Tonight, the stars were a muted scatter behind high cloud, and there was no wind to push them around. The climb had its landmarks, the turnout with the old milepost rusted flat, the slow bend that made a quick look into the valley, the hatch-painted box on the shoulder where chains could be checked with a boot heel. He drove as if the mountain had asked for a certain kindness, and he had agreed. Ahead, the tunnel's mouth was a wide, dark ellipse cut into the rock, bracketed by rectangles of sodium light. A sign a half-mile out suggested a frequency, tune 530 AM for tunnel updates. He'd seen that kind of thing in states that liked orderly traffic. It was usually a loop reminding everyone to keep lights on and not to stop in the bore. He turned the old AM knob and found the frequency by ear, that small quiver of noise that turns into a voice when it locates itself. "This is Kestrel Operations," the radio said in a measured tone that sounded like a person who had been taught to make the air calmer. "Maintain posted speed. Headlights on. No lane change. Vehicles over 13'6" must use designated bypass. If in doubt, take the shoulder turnout and call the number on the placard." The tunnel's concrete edge grew in his windshield. The black opening seemed to hold its own night inside the night. The voice continued with weather and a mention of routine maintenance. Nothing unusual. He checked his height in the mirror where he'd stuck the tape 1210 and watched the clearance board as the mouth approached. The digital readout above the arch glowed a comfortable green. Clear. He rolled into the bore on humbly perfect tires. The world changed. The mountains swallowed half the sound and gave back the rest, turned by concrete into a long, comfortable hush. The walls were a pale stone color in his lights. The ceiling, bristled with pipes and cable trays, ran away ahead with a repeating pattern of fixtures that the eye could set its heartbeat to. On his left, a low parapet separated the lane from the emergency walkway. On the right, a thin drainage channel carried a thin line of water that kept its own pace. The posted limit inside was 45. He set an easy 43 because numbers behave better when they're not asked to be exact. Painted markers on the wall told the truth regularly. 1,500 meters, 1,400 meters, 1,300 meters to the exit. In the first recess on the right, An emergency phone sat under a small blue sign with its callbox door closed like a mouth. The boar breathed fresh air pulled in through something he couldn't see, the ventilation fans upwind of him turning slowly enough to be felt more than heard. The AM voice returned. Kestrel operations. Traffic is light through the bore. Expect minor hold at midspan, while maintenance adjusts a panel. Do not stop unless instructed by stop bar. If you need assistance, use the next lay-by. He didn't mind a minor hold. He'd rather the mountain get what it needed. He took a slow breath that tasted like clean rock and a little dust. The sound of his engine echoed forward and came back fashionably late. He passed a cross-passage door with a window no bigger than a postcard. Behind the glass was a stairwell light, a steady, reassuring glow. 100 meters later, his radio became specific. Northbound tractor. Trailer with teal striping on the door and a white box. You're our last entry for the next cycle. You're doing fine. Maintain 43 if comfortable. There were other white boxes in the world. There were also other teal stripes. Still, he eased a nod at the dash because the tone had been kind. His mirrors said no one else was behind him. Ahead, the tunnel's small upslope leveled. The wall markers ticked down. 1,100 meters. 1,000 meters. The boar seemed to listen. He passed another emergency recess with a phone and a bright little hammer behind glass. The radio voice came again, closer in tone, as if it had leaned closer to the microphone. A short hold is coming at Bay 9. We'll set a stop bar. You'll see a red light. It will be a 3-minute pause. Please remain inside your vehicle. If you prefer, set your brake. He didn't need to prefer it. He set the brake because setting the brake makes quiet feel anchored. The floor under the tires was textured lightly, and he thought about how someone had imagined exactly this, a rig breathing slowly in a mountain and a driver letting himself like it. The stop bar appeared the way a decision appears without drama, simply all of a sudden present. Red lamps lit in an even line across the lane, edge to edge. He eased to a perfectly ordinary halt that would have gotten a gold star in a training yard. The brake huffed. The radio stopped talking, giving the pause a room to be itself. Bay 9 lived to the right of him as a lighted recess big enough for a service pickup and two people in hard hats to have a friendly argument. Inside, a panel the size of a closet door was open, and behind it the guts of something slept. Cables, switches, the neat rows of numbered circuits that someone loved enough to label right. No one stood there. A voltmeter sat on the ledge, its needle at 0. A yellow, portable work light glowed on the floor, plugged into nothing anyone could see. The walkway behind the low wall was empty. Tariq leaned forward and let his eyes rest on the red lights. Not stare. Just be present with them. It wasn't so different from a late train at a public crossing, except there was no train and no crossing, and no reason for his heart to move fast. Then the emergency phone in the recess rang. It wasn't loud. It was exactly as it should be, 2 modest tones, just enough to draw attention. He watched the box door, which no wind touched. The ring repeated once, then stopped. In the tiny window of the cross-passage door across from Bay 9, the stairwell light flickered and returned as if reminded of its job. The radio came alive. Bay 9 phone acknowledging ring. No action needed. It said the words like a lullaby. Thank you for holding. Across the lane, on the left wall, a square of white light appeared behind a matching cross-passage window, as if someone had opened a door to a brighter hallway and then closed it again before the light could decide to come fully in. Footsteps didn't follow. A smell did faint, like cool concrete freshly mopped. The ventilation changed tone by a half step. Tariq sat without trying to parse it. He was good at letting a thing be what it said it was. He studied the red bar's reflections on his hood. He listened to the reefer behind him tick once as its controller thought about running, then decided to wait. On the wall to his left, the painted numerals 800 meters looked slightly newer than the rest. A small drip began somewhere high and hit the lane with a polite tap. Then another, spaced. Then none. The radio, as if hearing what he heard, offered, small condensation falling, no hazard. He smiled without moving his mouth. A soft motion passed across the far recess on the walkway. The kind of distortion you see when heat rises from asphalt on a cool morning, except the air here was cool already. and the motion was a little too deliberate for heat. It slid from recess to recess without touching the phones, without disturbing the yellow caution stencils. If a person were walking there, they would have made a sound boot, scrape, fabric. This made none. It reached Bay 9 and paused as though reading the panel. The portable work light nudged its halo a fraction wider. The stop bar glowed untroubled, and then, one by one, squares of red went dark in a clean sequence like keys on a keyboard being released by a careful hand. "Proceed when ready," the voice said, as if the mountain had exhaled exactly once and would be happy to inhale again later. He let the truck roll. The brake released with a self-satisfied sigh, and the weight eased gently onto the driveline. He kept the same speed. He didn't hurry through the calm. The radio gave a brief update for someone who wasn't there. Then, in a tone that almost approached personal, added, "Thank you." Past Bay 9, the bore felt fractionally cooler, as if a door somewhere had been opened to let the world in, and then closed with respect. The markers ticked. 700 meters. 600 meters. He passed a lay-by where a closed maintenance cart sat with its lid latched and a clipboard on top, a pencil resting exactly perpendicular to its edge. No signatures, no smudges, just readiness. The AM voice resumed with generic talk. "Keep right. Space between vehicles. Use hazard lights only in the event of an emergency." It changed from that to a small weather notice about a shower at the far portal, as if it had noticed the world beyond the mountain and pointed at it gently. Road may be damp at exit. He believed it. The smell in the bore had shifted, less dry paper, more fresh, chilled air. The lights ahead took on the faintest haze that makes illumination softer. At 400 meters, there was a short jog in the wall where a service passage crossed above, and the ceiling dropped a little, pressing the sound down for a handful of seconds. He went through like he was greeting a friend in a doorway. On the left, the next cross-passage window was black. On the right, the emergency recess phone had its receiver just slightly askew on its hook, tilted as if recently answered and replaced with care. He did not stop. He let the small clue have its small weight. Toward the end, the gradient sloped down a hair. His rig's mass noticed. He nudged the pedal just enough to keep the number honest. The far portal's rectangle grew and took on a halo of weather. Fine mist lifted by a draft. The ventilation fans above that zone expressed themselves in a higher tone. He could hear a bit of outside sound riding in trees working against each other, someplace water talking. As he reached the last 100 meters, the radio's voice shifted to a sign-off cadence. "Kestrel Operations thanks you for your attention. When safe, retune your radio. For breakdowns within the bore, use nearest call box. For emergencies beyond the bore, contact local services." A beat. Then, unexpectedly, "Northbound tractor with paper stock, you're clear, and you drove that well." He allowed himself the slight private grin of a student who got the right answer on a problem nobody else knew they were taking. The AM band slid naturally into a fuzz of other stations as the portal's threshold passed over him like a curtain he didn't have to lift. Outside, the mountain presented itself in mist-streaked rock and a stand of fir in which every needle seemed outlined in moisture. The road widened its shoulders to give the weather room. His tires made a different sound out here, less echo, more whisper. He flipped his wipers to their friendliest speed and watched the glass clear itself in quick, neat arcs. There was a turnout just beyond the tunnel where the grade allowed a bit of level ground, and a thick log guardrail stood like a line of old men watching the road. He signaled and pulled in, not because he needed to, but because sometimes you offer the night a courtesy and it offers one back. He set the brake, let the engine calm itself, and sat with his hands idle for a measured count to 10. The radio, now back to its usual range of distant talk and faint music, didn't argue. On the dash tray, the coin he kept had rattled a barely noticeable bit out of place. He put it back where it belonged with a precise press of a thumb. That was when he saw the small, clear piece of plastic tucked under it, as if it had ridden there since the last time he'd cleaned, even though it hadn't. An inch long, maybe. Thin. On it, in tiny block letters, a print like you'd put on a cable or a switch. Bay 9, Pinnell whipping schedule. The wear on the plastic looked like it had sat in someone's pocket a long time before finding its way to his dash. It had no business in his truck. It also didn't make a fuss about being there. He held it between finger and thumb. It made no noise and had no smell. He slipped it into the small notebook, where he kept things that did not ask for conclusions. He sat a moment longer and watched mist comb through the firs and imagined the cross passages with their lights doing the patient work of being lights. A car went by in the far lane, going somewhere in particular and nowhere at all, and that felt correct. Back on the descent, his brakes did their job like they'd thrown their hats in joy when they got hired and never stopped being good at it. The grade settled, then rose and fell politely. In town at the foot of the pass, he swung into a fuel station that liked to keep hot soup available through the small hours and had a polite sign asking travelers to keep the pumps clear. He topped off and said hi to the clerk, who knew the difference between a person who wanted to talk and a person who wanted the quiet to keep going. On the counter, beside a rack of maps that were always current for the next county over and wrong for the one you were in, sat a small stack of folded cards with the state's crest. Tunnel safety tips, they read. He picked one up out of habit. Inside, a list of decent advice. Lights on, keep right, listen to the advisory radio. Near the bottom, printed in a lighter weight, an extra line. If instructed to hold, set brake. The hold will be short. Trust the voice. He smiled with a sense of good company he hadn't expected from a pamphlet. Gauges set, thermos topped, he rolled on with the day beginning to uncurl behind cloud. A section of wet pavement lay ahead like a ribbon of darker silk. The rig cut it into halves it knew how to put back together. The AM band faded into music as the land opened. He didn't tell anyone on the radio what he'd seen or hadn't. He filed it down alongside a rule that had just written itself in him. In long tunnels, if a calm voice asks for a minute, give it the minute. The mountain is old. The road is new. Their arrangement is an ongoing conversation. Later that week, on a different run, he came through Kestrel again in daylight. The bore was the bore clean, bright, the sort of modern calm that stops big things from feeling larger than they need to. At Bay 9, a crew worked with a very real panel and very visible tools. One of them raised a hand to greet him with a small wrench held between fingers like a pencil. He raised his hand in reply. The radio, tuned out of habit by then, offered the same gentle reminders in a different voice. It all felt friendly, like returning to a place that had kept part of your route safe while you were gone. He kept the plastic label in the notebook. It didn't show it around. It lived beside business cards collected over years, and the small grocery receipts that had notes on them he didn't want to lose. It carried no weight in the world except in the inch of space between his chest and the wheel where a driver keeps his attention. He checked tires just as he always did, traced his route in fine pencil lines, and when Tunnels asked him for anything, he said yes in a way that didn't need words. The mountain didn't owe him a story. It had given him a safe passage. That was enough. But sometimes, when road and night narrowed to what they are at their most honest, a set of lines and a hum and a person trying to do a job well. He heard in memory a measured voice test a microphone and say hello to whomever would listen. He listened. The bore breathed. The road kept its promise beyond it, and the world, large as it is, felt precise for a while. Story number 6. Night along the tidal flats felt like a held breath. Naomi Lynn liked it that way. Low country, salt in the air so faint it barely remembered the ocean, tall grass moving in soft squares, and the highway slipping between water and marsh like a pencil line the land hadn't decided to erase. Her trailer carried dry goods bound for Barrier Island's light, well-balanced, wrapped tight. She kept the cab uncluttered, atlas in the side pocket, dash wiped to a healthy glow, thermos that kept steam without boasting, a foam earplug container that never had earplugs in it anymore, but stayed because it had earned the space. The gauges sat in their dim constellation. She drove as if the night had its own pulse, and she was just keeping time. This route had an odd tradition that suited her: no big bridge at the river's widest throat, just a short ferry that crossed the channel where the current decided to be honest. She'd used it a dozen times in daylight, each trip a tidy 12 minutes dock to dock. The timing worked out so that tonight she'd meet the last run. She didn't mind. Ferries make other people do the navigating for a while. Drivers enjoy being cargo when it's polite. A mile from the terminal, a small green sign gave the news: last ferry 12:30. She checked the clock. Plenty of margin. The road narrowed and sighed its way between reeds. On the right, a crab shack and a bait shop flashed a couple of sleepy bulbs for nobody in particular. A water tower with the county's name wore the moon like a borrowed hat. The terminal showed itself modestly. A low building with windows on all sides, a booth, a looping lane with faded striping, and a set of lamps that haloed the asphalt in soft yellow. No lines at this hour. A signboard politely asked drivers to set their brakes on deck. Another listed fare by axle and the usual disclaimers. The booth light was on. A person in a reflective jacket leaned an elbow on the counter, reading something on paper like it might admit a secret if given the chance. Naomi rolled to a stop by the window and eased the glass down. The air smelled like cool rope and damp wood. The jacketed attendant glanced up with the unhurried kindness of someone who likes nights that mind their own business, and passed her the handheld the tap-to-pay card reader that traveled between worlds on a lanyard. "Evening," they said, the word falling like a folded blanket. She paid. The receipt printer chirped and produced a thin paper that curled at the edges. She folded it once and tucked it into the visor out of habit. The attendant looked past her, at the quiet road. "You'll be the last," they said. "Deck'll take you forward on the starboard lane. Ramp's slick. Mind your step if you stretch." She nodded. The metal ramp bobbed and sighed. Beyond, the ferry's deck lights burned steady, the soft industrial kind that flatter nothing and keep everyone safe. A figure in an orange vest raised an arm and drew small circles. The universal gesture for ease forward little, little, little. Now straighten. Good. Naomi guided the tractor onto the steel with the same respect she used for every dock and scale. The deck under her tires gave that one-of-a-kind feedback, neither road nor pier, but a quiet machine laid on water. She fit her wheels into painted lanes. The deckhand in the vest set chocks at her tires and gave a thumbs up in a way that said, "You remembered the brake without needing me." She did. The hand signal came with a grin that could be seen below the brim of the vest's hood. The person walked forward, put a hand on the low rail like they were speaking privately with the river, and glanced at the wheelhouse. No other vehicles rolled aboard. Across the deck, a single sedan faced the rail with no one visible inside. The ferry's diesel throbbed underfoot and then settled into a smooth, low argument with the current. The ramp rose behind her in a slow arc and locked with a decisive clunk. The ship rubbed against the fenders, and the sound said, "We have done this 1,000 times." There was a ritual to the start, a horn note, one long, that rolled across the flats and came back as a suggestion. A soft shudder as the boat let go of shore and put its shoulder into the channel, the lights along the pier sliding backward, as if the land had agreed to drift for a minute. Naomi sat back and watched the water move. The channel ahead was a darker band, in a wide, dark field, a road within a road. Buoys marked it: the close bell with its patient mouth, the nun buoy with its red hat, the can buoy in green like an idea of land. Each wore its own blink. The pair of range lights on the far shore, 1 mile apart but paired by sight, looked like two distant attention points that wanted to be lined up. She checked her phone. No signal worth catching. Good. It meant she could just listen to the engine count. She cracked the window to get the air right and picked out the order in the ferry's hum. The low push of the prop, the higher thrum of a generator, the occasional ticking of metal settling into the night's temperature. Somewhere up top, a radio murmured and clicked. The river owned its own small language. It brushed the hull with long, polite hands. It nosed the ferry this way and that, and was answered by adjustments at the wheel that Naomi could feel in the way her trailer leaned half an inch to left, then centered again, then half an inch to right. She liked the honesty of that conversation. If the boat needed to be somewhere purposed, it would be, and if it needed to wait, it would. Halfway out, a whiteness showed on the water, a low fog that wasn't weather, more like breath on the river's surface. The air took on a new cool, the kind that comes up from under. The range lights blurred, and then drew themselves sharp again in a narrow line. The bell buoy ahead decided it had an opinion, and spoke it. 2 strikes, pause, 2 strikes, pause, as consistent as a metronome. The deck speaker clicked without fuss. A voice came down with the matter-of-fact kindness Naomi associated with lift operators and people who answer calm questions over radios. "We'll hold on the swing for a moment," it said. "Please remain in your vehicle." She leaned an elbow on the wheel. "The swing," she repeated quietly to herself, thinking of the old bridge that had stood a county over before concrete made the straight line permanent. A swing span pivoted on a center pier to let boats pass. Those planks were long gone. The ferry had no bridge to mind, and yet the word had a weight that felt right in the mouth. Something in the dark ahead showed itself not by being seen, but by rearranging the other things. A blackness inside the black, an absence shaped like a geometry. The water's slipstream diverted around a silhouette where no pier should be. The ferry's engine went to idle, just enough push to hold its place against the moving world. On the far shore, the range lights faltered, one and then the other, as if a long, quiet shape had passed between them and decided not to be named. The bell buoy's pattern changed without losing its manners. 3 strikes now, spaced wider, like a small boat tapping its hull with a dock line to stay awake. The deckhand in the vest came to stand by the rail near Naomi's bumper and looked forward with their hands in their pockets like a person watching for a friend's porch light. A soft sound traveled under the deck, not mechanical, not animal, more like tide folding over a step. Then it was gone. The speaker clicked again. "Appreciate your patience," the voice said. Crossing in 3. On the visor, the thin receipt felt suddenly heavier to Naomi, and she slid it out. The little black printer letters told their tale. County crest. Fare. Axle count. Timestamp. The time said 12:30, which was true, and then it said it again, which was not how receipts behave. She rubbed her thumb over the second set of numerals and got the faintest smudge, as if the ink had tried to write twice and gotten as far as admitting its intent. She set it back, smiled at herself for noticing, and watched the deckhand tie one glove a little tighter, idle attention running out of places to rest. The ferry eased forward. The bell buoy returned to its original 2-strike opinion. The range lights drew together until they made a single star upon which a person could put their eyes and feel steadied. When the far dock presented itself, it did so with a modest canopy and the same lamps as the near one. If the boards groaned a different note, it was still within the Parsons register called normal. The ramp gears hummed as they lowered the leaf. The deckhand peeled the chocks away and raised a hand in that small ceremony that meant Naomi could be a road vehicle again. Night, they called, the syllable caught in the soft metal echo of the deck. It might have been the same person as before. It might have been someone else wearing the same vest the same way. She crept onto the ramp, the steel under her tires changing back to pavement with a sound like a door closed softly not to wake anyone. The road beyond inclined a hair, and then settled into a familiar 2-lane that knew its way through live oaks and weathered fences. She checked her mirrors automatically, the river behind, the lanes on deck clear, the lights pulling in. At the top of the rise, a small pull-off gave a view of the channel through a frame of trees. Habit made her pause there a moment. The far range light blinked, then steadied, then blinked again as a boat somewhere adjusted its opinion of the tide. She thought briefly of her father, who had sailed small things into bigger waters and taught her the courtesy of buoys, and then brought the rig into the lane again. Half a mile on, a little store sat at a crossroads, lights on, the sign promising coffee and pie in a font that had outlived several owners. Naomi stopped for the coffee because it seemed both right and easy. Inside, ceiling fans turned slowly. The bell above the door made its cooperative sound. The clerk wore a sweater even though the room was not cold and smiled without a schedule. "You came over on the last one," the clerk said, as if offering a compliment for good timing. "Lucky me," Naomi said. "Smooth crossing." "Glad for it," the clerk said, putting a lid on the coffee with a kind of showman's care. "Fog likes to sit on that bend. Sometimes the crew waits a spell. Better the pause than the story." On the bulletin board near the register, a flyer with the county crest leaned at a small angle. "Ferry hours," it said in big print, and then in smaller. "Night crossings weather permitting. Captain's discretion on fog or swing." The paper's edges were softened the way paper gets when the air loves it too much. A little pen mark added last month's date next to the printed line as if it needed company. Back in the cab, the coffee made a sturdy promise through the lid. Naomi set it in the holder and shifted the rig into motion. A few minutes later, on a straight stretch, curiosity tugged, and she reached up to the visor for the receipt. It hadn't stuck well and slid into her lap with a whisper. 2 fields had been stamped with ink too light to read. She tilted the paper. The light found the impression. The dates were similar but not the same. Night and month shifted by 1 line, separated by a year that had no right to be there. The ferry's name carried a version she knew from photographs of the old boat that retired before she ever took this route. On the bottom corner, A faint pencil mark, numbers written by a hand that liked printing. 12. 30 inches, tiny perfection. She folded the slip once more and tucked it into the atlas between two pages where the river was drawn as a pale blue answer to a question. Then she did the simplest thing the road asks of a person. She watched the line and kept her wheel true. Morning showed itself over the marsh in a careful way, thin at first, then with color hidden under it like paint under a patience. She made her delivery, signed papers in a tidy loading bay where the concrete had been poured by someone whose father had taught him lines, and turned toward the highway again. 2 days later, with daylight sure of itself, she crossed back by bridge miles upstream to save time. On the far bank, she stopped at the ferry house because she could. The lobby had a display case with photographs of old vessels that had carried school buses and milk trucks and tired families in all kinds of weather. On one wall hung a framed transfer ticket, yellowed with curling corners. The fare was in smaller numbers. The font had a serif flourish. The time block had been filled with pencil that looked like it would smear if a person breathed too hard. A person in an office chair rolled by and saw where her eyes had settled. "Those old tickets last forever," they said. "We keep a few to remember when crews had to do everything by hand and hope the river wanted to help." Naomi glanced at the little card, then at her own folded slip in her pocket. "Does the crew still call holds for swings?" she asked, keeping her voice in the range called curious but not insistent. "Only on fog," the person said, then added with a grin shaped like a secret they weren't responsible for, "and on things the river knows about." That night, back on a different road under different trees, her mirrors filled with a long, clean view of a lake she wouldn't swim in and a sky that didn't need help being large. A thin line of red obstruction lights pulsed over a ridge in even time. Somewhere, a freight blew a horn in a pattern she could say without saying. She felt the hum of the deck and the small pause by the bell buoy, the way the body keeps rhythm as memory. And the feeling wasn't fear. It was inclusion. She kept, in the atlas, the slip that said too much and nothing, folded into a square beside routes she could trace with her fingertip and find the texture of paper through the dye. If anyone asked over a counter about odd things, she might tell them the river has its ways and a ferry keeps the schedule it's given. And sometimes a voice says hold, and you hold, and everything, including the hush inside a name like swing, works out exactly the size it ought to. A week after, when a storm pinned her inland and the radio gave over to weather, she found herself on a night stretch with no water at all and still heard, out past the hood, the faint idea of a bell buoy keeping a beat for nobody but anyone who knew how to listen. She drove with the light touch that keeps the wheels honest, took her brakes where safety asked, and if a dock existed in memory that tipped gently underfoot, that was fine. She'd been carried a while by something that didn't need to be understood to be appreciated. Story number 7. The high plains at night were a field of measured darkness, broken by 1,000 red pulses that kept time with nothing human. Jonah Park moved through it with a steady hand on the wheel, the kind of driver who liked a long, even lane and a sky that minded its own business. His trailer held canned goods stacked like small promises. Not too heavy, not too light. The cab smelled faintly of clean vinyl and coffee. On the dash, he kept things simple: logbook, a notepad with numbers that made sense only to him, a map folded the way a person folds a shirt when they intend to wear it again. The windshield was clean enough to make the stars look like thoughts someone had punctuated correctly. Wind turbines stitched the horizon. Their towers rose from pasture and wheat stubble, white in daylight, black now, each crowned with a red beacon that blinked in careful unison. The map called the region a development. Locals called it the new crop. On a clear night, you could see the pulses line up for miles and miles. Red, 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 off. Red, 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 off. The plains breathing with a mechanical heart. He had the radio low, just enough to keep his thoughts from agreeing with each other too quickly. The CB wore its regular hush. The wind was quiet enough that the truck rode like a well-mannered elevator. He set his cruise a shade under the number the sign wanted, and watched how the land leaned. The turbines were dense to his right, sparser to his left, and the road ran between like a seam pulled just snug enough. That was the first thing he noticed. The red beacons lost their perfect sync and learned a new trick. It happened gradually, like a school of fish deciding to turn. The lights along his right went marching ahead in a chain, one after the other, a lazy wave rolling toward the south. The ones on his left held their breath. The wave reached a row parallel to the highway, and paused there as if it had found the edge of something. A half-mile ahead, a single beacon blinked twice quickly, then settled back into the slow pulse. Jonah watched without correcting the steering wheel. A driver watches the road first and the sky second. But he saw it. The chain resumed, this time down in the valley to his left, then across a fence line, then back toward him, as if someone were drawing a long rectangle with light and laying it over the map, edge just beyond the next off-ramp. He told himself a dozen reasonable things: maintenance modes, sync tests, a controller changing its mind. He'd seen fields of beacons fall out of step before. They were eerie and harmless. He checked his mirrors. Nobody close. He glanced at the thermometer on the mirror arm. 60. 2 degrees. A shy breeze. At the edge of hearing, the blades hummed to themselves in their separate, tireless way. The road offered a wide turnout in a place where the land dipped to accept a dry creek that wasn't completely dry this season. A battered sign on a T-post said Wind Farm Access. Arrow pointing down a gravel path. The beacons nearest that turnout blinked overlap bright, then bright again within the same second, like 2 taps on a shoulder. He eased off the cruise, more out of courtesy than belief, and put the rig's right tires gently into the places, rumble strip to feel the reassuring line of vibration. He signaled. He didn't have to decide everything. He could just pull off and look. The turnout was large enough to park a convoy and leave room for a question. He rolled in, chose a spot that didn't trap his nose or tail, and set the brake with that firm, tidy tug that makes a truck sit like it means it. He turned the radio down to a faint thread. He left the engine running. Out here, heat and light were tools you kept handy. Out across the fields, the red lights had quieted. For a dozen pulses they behaved like their handbook told them to. In the heavy dark between an away fence and the next rise, something low moved in a ribbon, a color so close to black, it was only a difference in texture. Not a storm the clouds held high. Not dust the air over the road was clear and cool. The ribbon flowed like a river, but without shine, just a sense of motion that owned its own slick shape. The wind shifted. Not much. Just a careful hand on the side of the trailer, a suggestion. The truck rocked once, slow. Jonah leaned his forearms on the wheel and let his breath slow to the rig's idle. He listened for the sounds the planes make when they're about to decide a thing: wire fences, humming a single note, grass corners talking to each other, far-off machinery considering its start. All he heard, at first, was the turbine field, giving its steady vowel into the night. On the median, a clump of bluestem sighed in the direction of the gravel road. The red beacons woke into their marching pattern again, this time shorter, like a bar drawn across the road ahead. It would have been a good place for deer to cross if there had been trees, and there were none. It would have been a good place for cattle if the fences wanted to be unhelpful, and they were intact. He found the hazard switch with his fingers. He didn't turn it on. He watched the road, the beacons, the dark. Something passed over the pavement half a mile ahead, then another and another, soundless at this distance. Bodies low, disciplined, quick. The wave of blinking red stayed slow and regular, the towers steady as couriers. The motion crossed the road and vanished into the cut beyond. Jonah found himself saying the first word since he'd pulled off. Okay. Not agreement. A room temperature acknowledgement meant for nobody in particular. The CB nickered with a fragment of life, just enough to prove it was awake. Northbound, hold a breath, a voice said, worn in around the edges like a favorite chair. Not a channel ID, not a call sign, just the idea wrapped in sound. Hold a breath. Then, as if embarrassed by its participation, static smoothed itself. He didn't answer. There was nothing to argue with. He rolled the window a little further down, just enough to let the night step in. Air moved across his face, cool and smelling faintly of crushed sage. What came next arrived on that air, not in the ears at first, but in the skin. The ground in front of the truck, where the turnout met the road, began to whisper with a sound like dry silk moving. Then the whisper rounded its consonants and learned to be a sound with weight padded, rhythmic, multiplied until it became a soft thunder that did not rattle so much as insist. Hooves, many, moving as one, crossing the blacktop at a practiced angle. He'd seen pronghorn in daylight, clusters that held a shape like wind-blown grass. He'd watched deer, always too much confidence at dusk. He had not sat and listened at night while a herd of something made a river over a road, and never once warned with sound a person could pick out ahead of time. They didn't bleat. They did their work. The red lights on the towers did theirs. The ribbon of motion kept its own secret geometry. The far blade field slowed its pulse as if waiting. The near field kept time with a careful promise. When the soft thunder eased and the whisper resumed, and then that too became nothing but night again. The beacons went back to the book. One wider blink. Long pause. One wider blink. He waited 2 cycles, then slid the window up, lit the hazard for a few measured squares, and eased toward the edge of the turnout. The tires found the pavement with the small civil conversation rubber and asphalt have when no one is angry. He checked his mirrors. Darkness told the truth. Ahead, past where the ribbon had crossed, he thought he saw the suggestion of bodies settling into pasture. Each one, a shadow carving a shape from the dark. He did not chase the suggestion. He rode his lane. At the first mile marker, he passed over a patch of dust like talc and felt the faintest patter on his undercarriage, the road exhaling. A low cloud mass on the long horizon strobed with distant heat lightning. He drove on. The turbines returned to their unison. He counted 3 cycles because counting is steadying. It wasn't until he reached a small rise where the road looked back on itself that he realized he had not been alone in pulling off. 2 sets of amber flashers had glowed quietly 3 fields back in opposite lanes, the way drivers call a truce with the night when the night asks politely. Their lights slid out of his mirror, and he couldn't say whether they had been there before or had arrived in the seconds between one thought and another. Not far ahead, a service yard for the wind farm cut a neat rectangle out of the pasture. Low buildings, a caged transformer humming with an energy that felt older than the new towers, a little weather mast with a steady green LED. A gravel pull-through curved in front of a glass door where a late light burned. Jonah swung in because the thought asked for it, and because the parking lot offered the kind of angle that made leaving easy. Through the glass, a white board faced the front with rows of tidy writing, maintenance, reset schedules, the cheerful bureaucracy of machines. On the far wall, a framed FAA notice listed obstruction lighting requirements in small font that still managed to sound confident. Taped near it, a paper he read by reflected light. Sync test. 030 045. Under it, someone had penned in block letters, as if reminding a friend, Wildlife Corridor Watch for movement. He didn't go in. He didn't need to. He tilted his head and caught his own phantom reflection in the glass, tired and fine. He returned to the cab, used the cloth on the dash to wipe a little square where dew had printed a fingertip that wasn't his. Or maybe it was. His hands had been there before. The night could borrow a person's evidence and give it back. The rest of the stretch felt like a book closing itself without drama. He rejoined the interstate. The plains became less crowded with machines. Town lights rose like careful promises, then fell behind. He topped a ridge in a shallow bend, and on the far side the red obstacle lights of a different farm blinked in new perfect unison, as if to say that chaos had had its turn, and order would like to speak now. At a fuel stop 30 miles on, the canopy washed the concrete in a dependable white. Jonah took his time walking the rig with a flashlight, looking at tires the way a person looks at a sleeping child. The undercarriage wore a fine powder line across one crossmember, as if something with a dusty coat had brushed by and kept going. He put his thumb to it and left a clear oval that would mean nothing to anyone else. Inside, at the register, the clerk asked him the good question, how was the road? He said it was thoughtful, which made her grin like she understood more than he meant. On the rack by the coffee, amid maps and mints and a pamphlet about the county fair, a single folded brochure wore the wind farm's logo. He picked it up. Inside, a cheerful diagram explained how sync lighting reduced light pollution and kept nights dark for animals and people. In a small box, as if an intern had been given room for a pet fact, it said, "Migration corridors cross our access roads. If you see unusual light patterns, reduce speed and proceed cautiously. Call our number to report wildlife." He put the brochure back where it had been because it didn't belong to him, and because he already knew it by feel. He slept in a quiet corner of the lot, a clean, legal square with a view of nothing in particular. The dream he had forgot to be complicated. He woke before dawn to a sky as pale as paper and a cup that had kept most of its heat. The turbines on a far low ridge turned without fuss. Their lights, needed still, blinked a few last patient cycles, and then surrendered to morning, like someone dimming the house as a guest stands to go. He told no one a story. He added nothing to the language that would make it taller than it had been. He drove on with the good rule he'd carried since the first winter he learned to respect ice. If the world taps your shoulder and says wait, you wait, even if you don't know why. Whatever crossed in the dark had asked for a minute. The lights had helped. He had given the minute. This is how a night decides to let you through. A week later, on a northbound run under a bright half moon, he saw the same field from the other side. The beacons did their work like a choir practicing scales. As he passed the turnout, 3 towers in a neat row gave an extra blink, quick, pause, barely anything. Maybe a voltage hiccup. Maybe just the way a person thinks they hear their name in a crowd and smiles despite themselves. He touched the wheel, lightly in reply, a human gesture to a landscape that did not need it. And the truck took a breath, like it agreed. Story number 8. Snow had a way of teaching quiet. Greta Mueller eased her rig toward the high pass with a calm hand, the engine doing a steady, warm kind of work. The night had shed its moon behind cloud. Pines crowded the shoulder in dark ranks, and the road climbed in measured curves that felt practiced. Her trailer held winter groceries for a town that knew how to make a stew last. Inside the cab, everything had its place. Gloves laid open to dry on the passenger seat seam, a thermos that lived up to its optimism, a dashcloth folded into a neat square, a pencil with a dull point that wrote better than it looked. The gauges glowed like small, diligent constellations. A sign at the base of the grade announced itself with polite insistence. Chain law when flashing. The amber lights started their slow blink as she drew even. Beyond, a variable message board told the truth in clean capital letters, white out above summit. Use plow escort. No passing. She took a breath that matched the engine's tone and guided the rig into the chain-up area, a wide shelf where the mountain allowed everyone to prepare. The air tightened with cold. Snow grains rushed past on a slant, as if the sky had a small opinion. She popped the latch on the side box and brought out the chains, laid them like rungs under the steers with practiced, respectful hands. Metal clicked against rubber in a friendly way. Bungees snapped into place with the restrained confidence of good elastic. She worked fast but clean, the way a person does when they've learned that fussing slows things down more than the weather does. A pair of other rigs idled nearby, one with hazards quietly ticking, the other with a driver standing on the catwalk swinging his arms for warm blood. Nobody shouted. The mountain discourages loudness like a library does. Greta set the brake, gave the chains a gentle test roll half a turn forward, half back, then climbed in, cheeks bright with the honest sting of air. She tuned the weather band and let a calm voice explain the world. Snow squalls. Visibility poor past timberline curve. Wind at the crest, trying its best at 30. A reminder. If you can't see the plow's lights, do not move. The first glow of amber and blue came up the grade like a careful sunrise. A single plow topped the lower curve and shouldered into the chain-up, lights washing the snow with a modest carnival of color. On its roof, a bar of amber strobes tilted and flashed. Beneath it, 2 small blue beacons pulsed in unison, softer than the amber, like the second hand on a kind clock. The blade wore the snow low and heavy, pushed right, and created a clean lane where nothing had been. Greta had known trains of plows running staggered, had followed their bright tailboards with gratitude. This was one. Yet something in the paint looked almost old-fashioned under the sodium light. A flat winter white, with the crest of an earlier highway department hand, lettered on the door instead of the newer print her state used now. The truck's silhouette was familiar, and out of time at once boxes and angles, a cab that sat a little prouder on its frame. The plow idled abreast of the ramp. A voice pressed in over low band on the AM frequency sign had suggested not CB, one of those public service loops meant for mountaineers. Blue light escort active, the voice said with a patience that might as well have been a hand on a shoulder. Maintain sight on the green guide. Set following distance the length of 3 snow markers. No passing. This is a courtesy line. She didn't see any green until the plow eased forward. Then, on the rear frame, a small circular lamp brightened a cool green coin of light that held steady while the amber and blue did their work. It wasn't bright in the way hazard lights are. It was steady in the way the horizon is. The green sat centered between the plow's tail lamps, exactly where an eye wants to rest when the world refuses to hold still. Greta signaled and fell in behind as the plow nosed into the grade. Chains made their obedient, muffled sound on the pavement. The world on either side narrowed, not a tunnel exactly, more like the inside of a wintered shell. Snow met the glass and swept away in smooth, silked strokes. The green stayed where it was, single and centered, entirely content to be watched. The first curve after the chain-up is where wind learns drivers' names. Greta's hands found the wheel in that old way, 10 and 2, relaxed but speaking. The mountain tried a gentle shove. The trailer felt it and answered with a shy sway that stopped before it became opinionated. The plow adjusted in the kind of way you only see if you've logged enough winters. A quarter turn, a whisper on the brake, a shift of weight, the wing blade lifting as it skimmed the berm. The green did not care. It hovered like a vowel you can hum indefinitely. Maintain lane, the AM said, as if repeating a lullaby. Visual on guide, 3 markers. If the guide is lost, stop. If the guide is lost, stop. Snow posts flicked past on the right, their black tips at shoulder height, marking where summer remembers the ditch. Greta counted them without counting. She could sense 3 of them between her and the plow, the way you sense steps when you're carrying a sleeping child up a stair you can climb in the dark. They passed the timberline curve, where the upper pines begin to thin and rock takes a stronger voice. Snow came harder there, the flakes smaller and more numerous, making a cloth of the air, a thin, living fabric that accepted no edges. The green held. Despite herself, she spoke to it under her breath. "Stay," she said, and it did. On her left, beyond where the road fell away, a guardrail ran its cold grammar against emptiness. It never announced itself fully, it just persisted in a straightness that eased the mind. On the right, a snow fence did its quiet engineering, turning the wind a fraction, teaching it to drop what it carried. A crosswind leaned on the trailer, with more opinion at the midgrade. Greta made her correction with that soft push on the wheel that says, "I see you," without making a scene. The old plow's tailgate carried a reflective board, "Do not pass," in letters that had known sunbuoyant and firm. The green disc sat just above, the only true color in a world of white, amber, and blue. Twice, it dipped for a second as the plow rode a frost heave. Twice, it rose in apology as if to say, "Still here." Under a snowshed, timbers like ribs laid over the lane, the sound changed the way sound changes in churches and under bridges and in kitchens when a kettle sits. The world softened, snow slid harmlessly along the shed roof, and fell off the far edge in a constant, quiet curtain. The green did a curious thing in that brief tunnel. It grew larger and closer without actually moving. The trick light plays when it finally gets a chance to behave within walls. Greta felt the truck relax, as if the cab had let out a long breath the outside heard, and decided to honor. Past the shed, the mountain put its knuckle down. Visibility went from poor to idea. The plow ahead narrowed to the green alone, a coin on velvet. And then the amber strobes became dots with friends, and then were just a glow in Snow's wide manuscript. She let her eyes learn the brand new trick of seeing one thing and letting everything else be reference. It wasn't fear. It was agreement. She had been given a thing to watch, and she would watch it. The AM voice came once more, almost conversational. "Summit gate on hold. Maintain position. The wind above the cut is under review." She smiled despite her jaw. Under review, like someone in a small office was marking a box on a form and deciding the sky could behave. The plow steadied in front of her, blade throwing white to the right in a soft, constant sigh. A set of tiny markers along its rear frame glowed in a line. A short ladder of green pips, the top one solid, the next 2 winking in a pattern that made following easy. She had not seen that system before. It felt like an invention that made sense immediately, without needing to be explained. They inched that way through a region of the pass where summer insists on wildflowers and winter insists on complete sentences. Greta kept her distance the length of 3 snow posts. Once, a gust reached up the shoulder and gave the trailer a nudge big enough to announce itself. The rig swayed, recovered, swayed half that, and settled. She kept the wheel gentle and neutral, and let the truck be the good animal it was trained to be. Past a seam where the asphalt darkened under unknown logic, the world eased a degree. It was either the wind changing its mind, or the cut giving back some shelter. The green brightened. Glittering crystals edged the windshield down near the hood, tiny commas of ice marking a paragraph break in the storm. In the near distance, a sign to right of lane showed itself shyly through the veil summit elevation quiet text on a white rectangle. The numbers were there and not there. The green traveled under them. Greta didn't read them. She didn't have to. Her body already knew they were high. At the very top, where the road drags us straight across a saddle and asks drivers to look left toward a drop too grand to be useful at night. A gate stood with its arm down, a bar like the line. At the end of a careful page, the plow's blue beacons slowed, then the green held steady and centered under the crossbar, as if introducing itself to a guard who could not be seen. The wind shoved once, just to test the commitment. The gate arm gave a tiny, unimpressed lift in its socket. The red lens on its end woke. Then, with ceremony only as big as needed, the arm rose, and the plow continued. The green stayed level, never celebrating more than necessary. On the descent, the road pulled its shoulders back in, and trees resumed their old helpful business. Snow on trunks made neat ribbons. Black, white, black, a barcode of the hill. The storm lost a portion of its argument. At a turnout where a ranger station sleeps in summer and braces in winter, the plow eased to the right, blade arced up with a hydraulic sigh that is the sound of tools agreeing with themselves. The truck idled a beat. The green on its back held perfectly still. Greta slowed to offer an acknowledgement she couldn't send any other way. 2 quick taps on the hazard switch, then off. The road's equivalent of a thank you note. The plow answered with 2 green blinks deliberate, not a stutter. Then the blue and amber dimmed in sequence, and the rig rolled into the dark edges of the turnout and settled beside a drift, like a man taking the next shift in thought. She took the rest of the grade at the modest pace of a person who had seen the weather's teeth and been admired for not noticing. The chains hummed with every contact point they had introduced to the road. The forest gave back an echo the way polite rooms do, only enough to keep you company. At the first valley town, a travel plaza burned its dependable light into a shallow bowl of fog that didn't mind being told what to do. Greta pulled into a slot that didn't ask her to back too fancy, set the brake, and let the engine unwind. Snow tapped the hood and the language drops learn when they are almost ice. She held the wheel another second after the key cooled and then let go. Inside, the heat had a generous quality. The counter held a jar of peppermint sticks and a block of sign-ups for the toy drive. Behind, the coffee sat up straight. On a wall by the restroom, next to a framed map of mountain passes and a poster about forestry, hung a black and white photograph in a dark wood frame. It showed a plow paused under a snowshed much like the one she had passed, blade down, men in heavy coats at its flanks, one with a hand on the rail like a habit. On the plow's rear, a single round lamp had been painted white in the photograph, but the caption had color in it somehow. Blue Light Escort, the little metal plaque said. Program in operation 1979, 2001. Stay with the blue. Greta stood in front of it for a breath, and then one more. The photo looked like 10,000 nights compressed into one. The green from earlier lived there, in the idea of that blue, in the quiet way machinery, and people sometimes build a rule that keeps strangers from meeting badly. At the register, the clerk slid change in a way that didn't make noise. "How's the pass?" they asked. No real interest in drama, just the small husbandry of local news. "The mountain's awake," Greta said, and then because she felt like giving the night a kindness back, "Plow escort got us through." The clerk's eyes flicked to the photograph and back. "They bring that program out when the sky remembers who it was," they said. "Officially, it's all new gear now, but I hear the old routes still know how to run themselves." She took the coffee and the little hand pie someone had convinced the oven to be proud of, and on the way out she passed a bulletin board pinned with notices: lost gloves, cabin for rent, avalanche training schedule. One sheet, folded back on a thumbtack, had a map of the pass with a quiet, dotted line drawn over it in pen. "Blue line," someone had written. Then, in smaller letters, "Follow the green." Back in the truck, she checked the dash cam out of ordinary curiosity. The recording wore the white carefully. The world past the hood was a realm of blur and glimmer. The sheds and curves and climb all present in the humble way cameras see through weather. The plow ahead was a probability for a good, long minute, amber turning the snow to gold in faint halos. But the tiny coin of green? The lens didn't catch it. The pixels refused to learn that color in that place. What the dash cam did save, at the moment the gate rose, was a change in the general light, a held breath, then a release that felt like the room had been waiting for the word, now. She didn't need proof anyway. Some rules don't care if you can replay them. She slid the phone away, took a reflective breath, and felt that long, workmanlike quiet inside the cab resume, the kind that makes the next miles easier for the little reasons that add up. On her way back through the past 2 afternoons later under a sky you could read a newspaper by, she looked for the plow turnout. It was just a cutout with a pile of snow shaped by wind and habit. Tire marks went in and came out and told her nothing. The guardrail above the large drop glinted in the pale sun as if to say it had never heard of night. She didn't tell anyone a story beyond the useful parts. Drivers trade tips, not sagas. Her tip was this: when the board says whiteout and the mountain offers a colored guide, make your world that small and let it be enough. Watch for the snow posts. Count them with your bones. If a voice on AM suggests review and patience, honor both. And if a steady little circle of color hangs like a promise in a winter's throat, give it room, and it will give you the pass. Later, much later, on a different road with different weather, and a sky freckled with honest stars, a green highway sign reflected on her windshield and printed a small circle on the glass, just an optical joke played by light and angle. For half a second, it sat in exactly the spot where the escort had lived, and she felt the smallest comfort that has ever come from a coincidence. The moment passed. The wheels hummed. Snow far up on the ridges held its own counsel. The night agreed to carry her the rest of the way without trying to explain itself. And that's where tonight's ride ends 8 of the scariest trucker stories from the highways that never sleep. Somewhere out there, another driver rolls through the dark, headlights cutting across a world filled with silence and secrets. If these stories gave you chills, give this video a like. It helps us keep the wheels turning through the night. And if you're new here, subscribe to The Sleep Haunt so you never miss another journey into the strange and the unknown. Until next time, keep your eyes on the road, your mind calm, and your doors locked tight. Good night and safe travels wherever the darkness takes you.